Thank you very much, Tanya and Karel, for having me. I'm very excited to be here with you today to teach this webinar on Corel Painter. The webinar is going to have two basic parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Corel Painter 12 interface. Then I'm going to show some brushes that I will use on a oil painting, and I will show stages of the oil painting and also talk about this little custom palette that we have right here. I'm going to dissect a couple of the brushes that I used on the painting. And then the second part of the webinar, we're going to look at a couple of treatments for your photographs. So anyway, look forward to getting started. Okay, I'm just going to close this right here and open. This is the light and shadow painting that I created using Corel Painter and my Wacom tablet. This is a painting that was done used from direct observation of a live blooming orchid, and the composition of this involves very important negative space. The negative space is around the piece. Also important in the composition are the angles. You'll notice that there are no straight horizontals or verticals in this piece. And also the background is very important with the play of the light in the background. When I set up the still life, I set it up so that there were no distractions to distract my focus on the subject itself. Let's have a look at the interface here. So we'll be able to navigate as we work. At the very top, we have the brush selector right here, and if we click this, we'll open the brush library. To the right of it at the top, we have the property bar, which is context sensitive depending on which tool you choose. So if I click on the dropper, you'll see the contents of the property bar changes, and click back on the brush. At the far right on the top, we have the recent brushes list display there. On the far left, we have the tool palette, and at the very bottom, the media selector. On the far right, we have the navigator, and then we have the color panel cluster, and two palettes that are very important to this piece are the color panel and the mixer panel. For this painting, I created a custom mixer panel, and I did so by sampling colors from the color palette and then laying them onto the mixer using the Add Color tool. So here we have the Add Color or Apply Color tool, the Mix Color tool to mix your colors, the Sample Color tool, Sample Multiple Color tool, the Zoom, and the Grabber hand. And when we're picking color from the mixer palette, we use the Sample Color tool, like so, and you'll see the color change in the color panel. Down at the bottom here on the right, we have the Layers panel. Okay. You'll also notice that there is a small oil painting palette here that I created. Now, with Corel, with the release of Painter 12, some of my favorite brushes were moved into the oils category. These brushes were originally in the real bristle category. Some of the brushes were also moved to the blenders category. So to make it easy to switch between brushes during the demonstration, I made this small oil painting palette. If you make custom palettes, you'll find that they will improve your productivity while you're working. So keep an eye on the far top left with the brush selector as I click on each of these. Like right now we have the Real Oil Short, the Real Flat Opaque, Real Tapered Wet Flat, Real Round, and the Real Round Wet, which is a custom brush that I made, and I'm going to talk to you about that later and discuss the brush controls for that brush. The Real Blender Flat, and the Just Add Water, two that I've used for blending. And then the texture that I used for the painting, the coarse cotton canvas, and the soft pastel pencil that I used to make the original sketch for it before I began laying in colors on the painting. Okay, I'm going to open the sketch. With the sketch, I used the soft pastel pencil, and I'm going to make a couple of marks on here so you can see how expressive it is. Yes, I also wanted to demonstrate each of these brushes before we get into it so that you're familiar with each of the brushes. So the soft pastel pencil, choose a little bit darker color here. The Real Oil Short. The Real Oil Short is good for laying in color. It's what I use to block in color right over the sketch of the piece. The Real Flat Opaque, much more opaque brush. The Real Tapered Wet Flat. The Real Round, which is also good for blocking in areas of color and has a beautiful bristly look to it. The customized Real Round Wet, and I'll demonstrate how it's different from the original one. If I paint really light, the Real Round Wet is going to blend. If I press harder, we're going to apply more opaque pigment. If I switch back to the Real Round, you'll see if I press hard, I apply a lot of pigment. If I press light, I get like a lighter version of the opaque pigment. So what did I do to make these two brushes operate so differently? Well, let's open the brush control panel right here. Okay. Both of these brushes have the same settings in the dab profile. I've used a medium profile for this brush, and you see an example of the Real Round brushstroke right here. They both use the camel hair dab type. Okay, let's move on down. I'm going to close this one. Okay. They both are real bristle brushes, and we can tell by the fact that Enable Real Bristle is checked. As we look at the roundness, you see that roundness is at 100%. And let me grab a smaller brush right here. So I'm going to use this one to demonstrate that. The roundness of a brush, we're talking about as if these are bristles. The Real Round has a rounded top like this. If we reduce the roundness, then it's going to appear to have a little bit flatter top. The length, it's the actual, the bristle length would be the length right here as I'm moving my cursor over this little doodle that I made to show the roundness of the brush. The profile length is the length of the entire profile of the brush. The rigidity, you see that this one has a low rigidity, which means the bristles are softer. a higher rigidity would give a stiffer feel to the brush. And then the fanning is 0, which means the bristles don't splay out like this. Now, here's our painter's secret. Down in the well profile, in the well panel here, you see resaturation is 100%. Now, this allows us to have a lot of pigment flowing through the brush as we paint. And you see down here, bleed is 35%, and expression is set to pressure. So it just has a little bit of bleed. And if we were to choose another color, like so, you know, it's bleeding a little, not too much. But if we choose my custom brush here, the Real Round Wet, look what we have. We have more bleed, and we can pull these colors into each other. Like so. So where the default brush had 100% resaturation, the Real Round Wet has only 10%. And expression is set to pressure. The bleed, instead of being down low right here, is up to 82%, and I set the expression to pressure for the bleed. So this brush is wonderful for painting, for laying down color, and then also for blending. And you'll see in stages 3 and 4 of the painting that I use this brush quite a bit for painting and blending. Okay. Close this.
Do you tend to just use the color wheel and kind of mix paints as you go, or do you set up your color mixer in advance?
It depends on the piece. If this particular painting is part of a series of paintings of flowers, one of my hobbies is growing orchids. And so I have a few that bloom kind of seasonally. And I set this up ahead of time for this one, but sometimes I do mix colors on the fly as I go.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, with this one right here, the first stage, I sampled some dark pink and red from over here and laid in the color with the Real Oil Short and the Real Round. And I'll just make some marks on here. This is a much smaller brush than I used. We can adjust the size by like so. And then this one here, see how easy it is to switch brushes with the custom palette? And so I lay in the color very roughly and start to work a little bit towards the highlights and shadows and the atmosphere of the piece. I also wanted to make a comment about the sketch here before I close it. I'm painting directly over the sketch, but before I started doing that, I floated a copy of the sketch to a layer so that I could have it for safekeeping, because later on when I want to be painting more of the details of the edge of the flower petals and so on, I want to have the sketch to refer to. So to put a sketch on a layer, for those of you that don't know that, you can select all and then choose the layer adjuster, hold down the Alt Option key, and click to make a layer. And then to make it transparent, to make the white areas transparent, select Multiply. And I'll just turn this off and you'll see the white area is transparent. So I saved a copy of my sketch at that point with the layer intact, and then I painted directly over the sketch on the canvas. And that way I could turn my layer on and off as I worked. So I'm just going to close this off now.
Do you do...
Sketch.
I'm just waiting for it to catch up to me. Do you do all of your sketching within Painter, or do you ever do it on a sketch pad and scan it in and bring it in?
Oh, I do both. I keep a sketch pad, a sketchbook going constantly. I'm always drawing. I love drawing with a rotring pen and also with various types of pencils, you know, the 2B, 4B, 6B pencils. Yeah, and then I scan my sketches sometimes and bring them in. You know, other times I draw directly on my laptop or my desktop computer using Painter and the Wacom tablet.
Which tablet do you have, Cher?
Okay, right now I'm using my Intuos 5 tablet, and I've enjoyed using Wacom's wonderful products ever since a pre-release beta tablet of their first pressure-sensitive tablet.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So with this one, you see the real round brush marks that are down in here. I've introduced some more browns up in this area, and blocking in the color on the flower petals. In this one, I've introduced more of this bright pink in the lower part here, and started modeling the flower petals and added varied color. Now I'm going to unmount this and open 2 stages because this is an important part. Okay. Between these 2 stages here, on the left, you'll see I like to rough things in rapidly, and I make these from my brushing technique. I'll just do kind of like a dark gray right here, and I've got the real round, and I'm just sketching it in like this, and I work fairly quickly. And then I go over it with the real round wet and say a lighter version of it, and I'm just going to paint over here. See how it's blending now? But the marks, the quick crosshatch marks that you see right here are to get a feel for how I'm pushing and pulling the warm colors and cool colors in the foreground and the background. And with this, you know, I've done quite a bit more blending at this stage, and I'm going to zoom in and show. You know, it's still pretty rough. But you see I've got a small brush, you know, because the actual version of this is a big file, and I've really cross-hatched in here and laid it over some of the area that I've blended, and then I go back in and I eventually blend this some more. Here I've used the real flat opaque brush right here and decrease the size of it a little bit, and I've gone along here and I'm picking up some of the highlights on the edges of the petals here. All of this will be blended, or I'll go over it with either the real round wet or the real tapered wet flat, or this one here, the real blender flat. Okay, here we are at almost the final version, and I'm going to zoom in and see how I've kept some of this crosshatch look right here. I've softened some of those hard edges where I've added the highlights to the petals. I use the real tapered wet flat to pull these expressive strokes coming out here. You see some of the beautiful bristle marks, you know, that the painter brushes give us. And I didn't want a really tight edge on this, you know, but I picked out some of the highlights here, and then I blended it with one of the brushes that allow us to push and pull the paint around, you know, like the Real Blender Flat, the Real Round Wet, and the Real Tapered Wet Flat. I also took a smaller version of the Real Oil Short, and I pulled these little brush strokes out right here. And then here you see one of the wetter brushes, like the Real Round Wet, Real Tapered Wet Flat, I used to pull color down into here. You see I'm doing some of it right here. And these expressive marks were made with the Real Tapered Wet Flat and the Real Round Wet. I'm just using a darker color so that you can see how that applies there. Okay. And here's the final. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to take a look here at the final. You know, I wanted this to have a halo effect around the edge of the flower, and with the warm and the cool colors. Cool colors in the background helping the petals of the flower come forward. And you see some of the final highlights that were put in here with the Real Oil Short and the opaque brush. Yeah. Okay, well that concludes the demonstration of the painting. I wanted to review a couple of these brush control settings for people that are interested in the brush controls. So let me just close the mixer right here because we don't need it. Again, the brushes that I used in this oil painting demonstration are some of my favorite brushes in Painter. They live in the oils category with Painter 12. In Painter 11, like I said, they most of them were in the Real Bristle category. I just want to show you a quick tip right here. It's one of my favorite features in Painter 12 is that we can switch between the earlier brush library if we want. So if we're just getting up to speed with Painter 12 and we want to use the brushes how they were organized in Painter 11, we can just switch libraries like so. So you would go to the brush selector, you know, open the brush library, and access the pop-up menu from the button in the, near the upper right, and go to Brush Library, Painter Brushes. So right now we're using the Painter 12 brush library, and here's the Painter 11 brush library. And I've created this oil painting palette here, which we'd like to share with you if you enjoy that. And I just want to show you quickly how to make a custom palette like this. I'm not going to go through the whole process, but if you'll notice, like right here, say if we wanted to add the oily bristle and make a new custom palette, see the little no sign, the little red no sign? It's not going to let us do it. But if we hold down the Shift key and pull it off, see a little green icon there? It's going to allow us to make a custom palette. So we can continue to hold down the Shift key and we can add more brushes to it. We can size it by it's not letting me grab it right now here by pulling on the edge. Yeah, and to name it, we go up to Window, Custom Palette, Organizer, and we would click on this here, and we can name it by clicking the Rename, and then click Done. So I'm not going to save this little custom palette right now. I'm going to go ahead and delete it since we have this one. Yeah. And we'll go back over here. These are mostly real bristle brushes. So here we have the real Bristle Panel. The brush that we have chosen is the Real Tapered Wet Flat. I'm going to choose the Real Oil Short. We see that it has a 40% roundness. Bristle length is 1.20, so it has fairly short bristles, hence the name Real Oil Short. The profile length is also fairly short, 12%. Bristle rigidity is up to 67, which means it's fairly rigid. And it has a tiny bit of fanning on the bristles, 2%. And with the surface here, the friction means the tactile experience of dragging the brush over the surface and how the bristles are going to interact with the surface that you have chosen, and then the height. Down below, and I'm going to choose the Real Round Wet to describe this. Here we have the resaturation, which is the pigment flowing through the brush. And this one has a low resaturation of 10%, and that's set to pressure. Bleed is turned up to 82%, and the bleed expression is set to pressure. So, you know, I hope you enjoyed the description of the brush controls that were used to build these couple of brushes and the stages of the painting. This concludes this portion of the webinar, and we're going to be moving on to the photo treatments.
Cher, I have a couple questions before I was holding until you were done.
Okay.
We're wondering, Kathy would like to know, which tool did you use for the cross-hatching work that you did?
Oh, thank you very much. I used a couple. I used the Real Oil Short to get a real contrasty. Because when I blocked in originally and then later, and then also the Real Round, just to block in color quickly. And then when I was doing the later, you know, kind of impressionistic cross-hatching, it's just I used the Real Round Wet and also the Real Tapered Wet Flat, also the Real Blender Flat. And if I go in, here, let me zoom in here to where I can see my cursor. See, I like to have a lot of activity with my brush work, so it's making the brushes smaller and then doing these types of marks. You can do it with just about any of these brushes. The ones, of course, the ones that are opaque are going to show a lot more than the ones that are wetter, which give you more of a blending. Did I answer your question?
Yes, I think you more than answered the question. Okay. I'm just scrolling down here.
Thank you very much. Okay.
So I wanted to let everyone know that we will be posting these brushes for you. They're not up on Corel.com yet, but I'll be sure to email all of you when we have the brushes posted so that you can play around with these. And there was another question from Kathy asking, and we didn't really change the blenders from 11 to 12, but she's noticing a difference, or at least a difference in the blenders that you're using here. And do you have any tips for using the blender brushes in 12?
Okay. Hi, Kathy. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, we will have your tutorial being posted to Corel.com today, the one that you did for ImagineFX, if that helps.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
The blenders in Painter 12 can be potentially confusing right out of the box. Let me go to these blenders here. Blenders are one of my favorite categories, actually. I'm head over heels in love with Painter after all these years. Okay. Now, before Painter 12, the blenders as a category did not apply pigment. But with Painter 12, some of the brushes were reorganized to be in the blender category if they had blender in the name. So I'm going to make a little file here and demonstrate this. Look at the top of the blender category here. We have blender bristle. What we have here is a brush that has some artist oil capability in it. It's actually applying some pigment, but it is a blender, you know, because it allows you to blend existing pigment. I could see how it could be potentially confusing, so this is why I made this custom palette, so that we wouldn't have to go between all the categories as we were talking about the painting, and then we could have more time to focus on the brush controls. So most of the brushes here don't apply pigment, but some do. Say if we look down here at the detail blender, you see it's just, let me zoom in here. You see it's just pulling the color out, but it's not applying any new color. One of my favorite blenders is the Grainy Water. The Grainy Water picks up this canvas texture that we have here, and you could see some of it in the edge. So folks, if you want blenders that do not apply pigment, look at the blur, the coarse smear, the detail blender, diffuse blur, flat grainy stump, grainy blender, grainy water, just add water. Let's see. Round blender brush applies a little bit of pigment. Look at the runny, the smear, and then the smudge. The smudge is another favorite one because the smudge, see the texture coming up? You get quite a bit of texture with the smudge. Okay, so I hope that answered your question. Do we have any more questions? Okay.
I'm taking a look. Could you just review exactly what bleed means once again?
Okay, let's go back to the brush controls, and here's the well palette. Bleed is, let me choose a brush here. Hold on, this one. Okay, the bleed allows one color to blend into another. Let me choose the blue. See, this one doesn't have a high bleed setting. It's only a little bit. The real around wet, if I press really light, see I'm bleeding this pink out. See how I have the blue chosen in the color panel? And I'm just pulling, I'm pressing very light on my stylus, on my Wacom tablet, and I'm pulling this out. I have a high bleed setting. If I turn the bleed down, see I'm actually applying more of this blue color. If I turn the bleed up, see I'm pulling, it's kind of mixing with the pink that's here and adding a little bit of the blue. So it allows the colors to mix and bleed together as if they were wetter. And with this particular brush, I set it to pressure. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, that was great.
Thank you. Do we have other questions?
There was just a general question about, do you always remain on the canvas layer, or do you end up using multiple layers when you're really in the painting process?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay. With the painting like the light and shadow play, I like to paint on the canvas because I like to simulate the experience of actually painting on a canvas or painting traditionally and not have it be perfect. I was having fun with this piece, and it's definitely a hand-painted piece. Now, if I'm working on a commercial illustration and I want everything to be, you know, say certain areas to be expressive, certain areas to be tight, I will put individual elements that I'm working on separate layers. And that way, if my client wants me to change the color on someone's dress, or if I want to change the color of an object or isolate an object, say a chair or something in a composition, that way I can use a layer in the layers palette and use this preserve transparency right here and constrain my strokes to just that area on the layer. But that's mostly for my illustration work, commercial illustration. When I'm painting like this, I'm pretty much on the canvas. If I want to try out something, like a different color, say, for this center portion right here, it's possible that I might make a layer, try it out real quick, say I don't like it, and delete it. But most of the time I'm painting right here, and I'll just doodle it and paint over it. And then we do have the flexibility of the undo in Painter, so occasionally I'll either paint over an area or I'll do undo a couple times to undo those strokes, and then I'll begin painting again. And I wanted to let you know one other way that I use to sample colors on the fly. It's, see, I have the brush tool chosen right now. It's pressing down the Option key, and see it changes my brush cursor into a dropper. And see it, the color changing in the color panel. So I'll press the Option key, either setting on my tablet or on my keyboard, and that way I can change my paint color on the fly. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and I'm going to hold questions because I know that you had more planned, and I don't want to stop you from getting there.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone, for your great questions. Okay, let me close this. All right, let's move on to the photo treatments. Now, I've been also a photographer for most of my life, and I enjoyed shooting film. I still shoot film as well as digital. So I'm going to open this image that I took when we were in Germany some years ago. I taught some workshops over in Europe. It was a great experience. If you like shooting film, some of you may like the grain that you see on the film. You know, I personally do. I think it warms up an image. And so I was thinking it would be fun to come up with some ways to add film grain to a digital photograph, because a digital photograph can often appear very slick. So here I've already made a layer to do this. I could demonstrate how to do that. Control Command A, or select all, and then holding down the Alt Option key and clicking with the layer adjuster so that we have a layer, because I like to work non-destructively when I'm working over a photograph like this. Now we need to set up our paper panel for this project, so we're going to choose Window, Paper Panels, and choose Basic Paper. And you see I've scaled it down to 45%. This is a 1,000 pixel image that we have here. And I've increased the contrast to 175. Now, the scaling of the texture will change depending on the size of your file. You want it to be very fine texture or grain. Another texture that's good to use with this is the fine grain, which is also in the default Painter library. Now, the effects menu is a very rich menu in Painter, and we're going to go down to the effects, surface control, dye concentration, which is one of my favorite dialog boxes in Painter. And the using menu allows you to use uniform color, paper, image, luminance, and original luminance. Now you see a little texture here. For this particular technique, we're going to increase the minimum. I'm going to bring it way up. You see the texture appear right here, looking like very, very grainy. You can bring it all the way up to 800%, but we're going to settle down here right about 185. And we don't want the image to appear a lot darker, so we're going to adjust the minimum slider. Now the maximum slider is adjusting the paper grain look on the peaks of the paper texture. The minimum affects the valleys of the paper texture. So what, if we bring it here, you see it looks, that makes the texture kind of go away, and it darkens the image. So the textures become flatter by doing that. I'm going to bring it down a little bit below its default. That way our image doesn't look too much darker. Default was 50%. And then I'm going to click OK. So you see we have a film grain look on our image. If you think this is too strong, we can adjust it here using the opacity slider on the layers panel. So voila, now we have film grain on our image. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the other photo treatment. With this one, we distressed a photo. And I took this photograph when my husband and I were in France. This is actually in Amboise, France. And for this one, we're going to use a different paper texture. I'm going to click here and look at my paper library. I'm going to choose Worn Pavement. This technique is in the Painter Wow book. And so I'm going to increase the scale of my paper a little bit, and I'm going to, I'm going to decrease the contrast just a little bit. We're going to put our image on a layer by choosing Select All, holding down Alt Option key, and we're going to click with the layer adjuster. Now we have it on the layer, and within the Distress dialog box, we have a Graphic Arts darkroom. You see it's turned our image black and white. Now we're going to increase the edge size to about 19. We're keeping the using menu at grain because we want to access this paper texture that we have chosen here in the papers panel. For more detail, we're going to turn the edge amount down. To about 12. And you see smoothing is at 3, and that smooths these edges right here. I want to reduce this to 1 so that we're pulling more directly from our image here. I'm going to leave variance at 60, and I want to bring out more lightness right in here. So we're going to reduce, you see, increase, and then reduce this threshold down to about 40, 42. One more. There we go. Click OK. So now we have a very nice graphic, black and white image from our photograph. There are a lot of different ways we can composite this with our image, but we're going to go down here and we're going to use screen, which is going to put the texture in the darker values, and we're going to bring this down to composite it so that we have some of the texture from the treatment and some of the texture from the image, and you can adjust this to your taste. So I hope everyone enjoyed the photo treatments. Yeah. I wanted to open, so that concludes this portion of the webinar. I wanted to open a couple of my oil paintings to close because this is predominantly about painting. The brushes are the heart of painter. This painting, A. Raffinelli Vineyard, I painted based on sketches done on location with the oil brushes in painter. Agave Sea View is a very quick study that was done from memory and from sketches. I had a sketch of the agave plant here that I scanned, and then I added canvas to my file and just kind of mimic these shapes, sketch these shapes in, and you see a lot of wet, oily brushes being used here. The artist oils and the real bristle oils, some palette knife work, and some of the blender's work. Here's a more detailed painting that uses the oils. And this is one of my very favorite places on earth. It's down at our natural park down near where my husband and I live. And this one, someone asked a question about layers earlier. Well, when I was resolving the water here, I did use multiple layers and turn them off and on as I was painting these marks here because I wanted the water to have a transparency to it and appear very vibrant. A lot of the oils brushes were used on this piece. Also, artist oils, capability brushes. And this was done based on sketches done on location in the memory of spending a lot of time down here. This piece, Carell selected to highlight my Painter Master Month, which I'm very thankful for. And I appreciate Carell having me this month as the Painter Master of the Month. This is a mixed media painting. There's a lot of oils work on this painting, and there's a lot of work with the pastels and the chalk. And I literally got lost in this painting for hours, you know, with the way the hills recede here and remembering that dewy morning and the breeze that was blowing and things like that. So this was a really fun piece to work on.
I just want to let you know that people are enjoying you going through your paintings here. Ooh, I love that.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot. This painting is one in a series of paths to water. that we take our walk in the morning, or we walk to go surfing or swimming in our beautiful Pacific Ocean. And this one was painted with the oils. I have taken photos of this location. I had them to look at. I also have done a lot of drawings of this location, and this little serpentine path. We walk down and then we make a left and we go down to the place that I just showed you with the agaves and with the view with the cliff stepping back. The light on the horizon, sometimes in the afternoon you have such bright highlights out here, and I use the blender brushes and also the palette knives, you know, to move the paint, and both brushes that were opaque, you know, to do these little highlights here, and then brushes that would blend more to paint the darker shadows over the receding hills. See.
Cher, do you have a service that you use to print your work?
Oh, yes. I have a digital artist atelier, and his name is James Respis, and he's here in San Diego. He's been printing my work for the last several years. And I can provide information if people would be interested, but in different areas around the country there are different ateliers for artists for the large format prints on canvas or on paper. And then I also have an Epson 4800 that I use for smaller prints. But Jim does a great job. And in the past, I've worked with Cone Editions in New England, and it was a wonderful experience working with them. And in the 90s, Harvest, and also Nash Editions have done a great job too. Yeah.
Thank
Being
you.
a surfer and an ocean, you're very welcome. Being a surfer and an ocean lover, you know, I love to paint the ocean, and this is an oil painting of what it's like to be in the barrel when you're surfing, and I use the palette knives to pull the paint down here that you can see. You see the bristle marks from the real round and some of the other bristle marks. And then the last one I was going to show is this real rose painting. So for one of my birthdays, my husband Steve got me a beautiful bouquet of roses, so I thought, I need to paint these. So this is a study of a few of the roses, and I used some impasto applied to some of the bristly brushes for some of the highlights on this piece. And it's a simple study of the roses painted with some of the oil painting brushes that you saw demonstrated today, and then some of the others that are in the oils category. So I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the paintings in my portfolio, and thank you very much for coming to the webinar. It's been delightful to be with you.
Cher, if you could see the Q&A panel, you'd see the thanks that you're getting right now, and that everyone is saying how gorgeous your work is. But there still is one outstanding question that's coming quite a few times, and that's about, is there a specific size, resolution that you set your paintings up at, especially if you want to print large format? How do you deal with that?
Okay. Well, we always want our computers to be more powerful when we're working on big pieces. So I did some research into the printing over the years and did some tests, both myself with my beautiful Epson printer here, and then also with my art atelier friends and colleagues. And it works to do the painting at the size dimensions that you're going to be printing. Say if this was going to be a 16 by 20, for instance, but we don't need to make it at 300 pixels per inch unless we're going to be using it to actually do offset printing. because the line screen and offset printing is usually about 150, so to have good resolution we would need to double that and make our pixels per inch 300. Inkjet printing at a digital art atelier or in our own studio is very different from the offset printing. So I would say do it at the half of that resolution, say 150, and I've even gone as low as 125 pixels per inch, but at the dimensions that I want to print it at, and had good results. If you have any questions, the best thing is to ask your digital artist atelier person and ask what they recommend for their equipment. But the values that I just shared with you work fine for me.
Okay, that looks like
I'm doing my book cover illustrations. Hello?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just saying that looks like it answered the questions that came in.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I just wanted to let everyone know that when I paint my cover illustration for my Painter Wow book, that I'm working at 300 pixels per inch and at the exact size that the illustration is going to be used, because the book cover is printed using a line screen. And so I have to have that 300 pixels per inch and sometimes more, and again, if I was going to an art print at a digital art atelier, then I can half that to about 150, but using the actual dimensions of the file that I was going to go to. Thank you very much for your great questions.
Well, thanks for answering all of them. I think there's only one that remains that was not answered, and that was, do you tend to use a specific paper texture when you're doing an oil painting?
Ah, that's a great question. Well, let me see. I like this coarse cotton canvas in the default library, and I want to let everybody know that I actually made a lot of these textures, and there's for Painter. I was very honored to do that, as well as quite a few of the brushes that are in Painter. The coarse cotton canvas is a seamless tiling texture, which means you're not going to see any repeated squares or what have you. It's a nice texture for the oil painting, and if you want to apply any surface texture over the top and then paint back into it, that works really nice. There are other libraries in the Painter extras that come along with Painter, so have a look at those. There are some more canvases that are nice as well, some smaller ones and some coarser ones. But this one was chosen for the default library because it's one of the most versatile. So I use this one quite often, and I choose others depending on the look that I want, if I want a coarser texture or a more subtle texture.
I should remind everyone that you can download Cher's workspace that she created for Painter 12 off of Corel.com if you haven't done that yet, and you'll see a lot of the custom brushes. She's done so much work for us over the years creating these wonderful textures and brushes and tutorials. Outside of the one that's going to be posted to the website today, there are many more that are already posted up there that Cher has created for us.
Thank you so much. I truly am honored to be with everyone and really appreciate Corel having me teach this webinar. And it was nice spending time with all of you out there who signed up and attended. And hopefully we get to meet sometime in person at one of the events or something. So I'll just say, again, it's been a real pleasure, and happy painting to everyone, and best wishes for your creativity.